You have now arrived at your destination.
Shreyas, this is such a joy to do. I've been a fan of yours from afar on Twitter for a while, but thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Harry.
Not at all. As I said, I've loved some of your Twitter threads and they've been pretty informative to me. But let's start with a little bit on you. So you've been part of some of the most incredible orgs from Stripe, Twitter, Google. How did you make your way into the world of product first? And let's start there.
Yeah, so I started my career back in the difficult, tough days of the Valley. This was 2001 as an engineer. And as an engineer here in California who needed a visa, it was very difficult to get jobs back then. It was like drastically different environment than the one we found ourselves in over the last decade. And so I was lucky enough, though, to join some really great teams early on in my career as an engineer. And I moved to Silicon Valley in 2003 to join a team that used to formerly be LoudCloud, the Mark Andreessen, Ben Horowitz company. And when I was there, I got introduced to product management, mainly because I found myself getting sent to customer interviews and customer meetings and whatnot by my manager. And I didn't quite understand why, because I was just an engineer, very early career. But I think my managers back then saw something in me that I did not yet. And I found myself getting very interested in learning about what customers are doing with the product, and particularly coming up with more creative solutions about to solve the customer problems. And that's when I realized that maybe I should try this product management thing. And so traditionally back then, most people would do their MBA in order to get into product management. And I decided I did not want to do that. I considered it, but I decided I did not want to do that. And I just said, let me just apply to some consumer internet companies. Web 2.0 was big back then, and I wanted to work on web products. And so I applied to a few companies and talked to Google, Yahoo at the time, Yahoo during its better days. And that was my first real product management experiences when I joined Yahoo as a product manager back in 2006. And then since then, it's been a really fun ride.
There's a lot that I just want to unpack. I want to start with just some nomenclature. Product management is thrown about quite a lot as a term. When I say product management to you, Shreyas, how do you define it?
Yeah, I love that question because there are many definitions of product management. And so my definition is product management is the art, science, and practice of making successful products and making products successful. Okay, so there are two aspects here, and it's not just a play on words. Both are very important. Making successful products means that you often have to start with nothing and then make a successful product. And so that's kind of the early stage to reaching product market fit and beyond scaling. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect, which is making products successful, is when, say, there is a product that already exists, and maybe you weren't there at the beginning, but it's at a stage where it's either poised for a lot of growth or it's not. Maybe it's even a turnaround story. And product management, again, is the art, science, and practice of actually making that happen, right? And when I share this, Harry, a lot of times people will ask me, "Oh, but wait, what is success? Can you define success for me?" And so my view of success is it's not complicated. Product success. You need to start with three things to begin evaluating product success, which is user adoption, customer satisfaction, and business impact. Right? Ultimately, any product, you need to start with each of these three or a subset of these three to determine product success. Now, the exact metric may vary depending on your product, depending on its stage and whatnot. But ultimately, building successful products is about user adoption, customer satisfaction, and business impact.
This is where I love the show, because like this was never obviously structured. Like user adoption is a first one. There are so many different metrics that one can choose as a focus point. You know, I speak to many who have number of users, and I'm like, no, we don't want to grow users as much as possible. That's not a sign of product market fit. What is number of sessions per day, number of tasks created. I don't care about top line growth of users, but the tasks that they do to signify their product love. How do you think about like finding the right metric within user adoption when there are so many?
Yeah. So I think metrics is a highly misunderstood concept, and there's just so much nuance to it that this kind of question gets debated endlessly within many companies, including extremely successful companies. It's like, what's the right metric? And let's do a bunch of these meetings to make it happen. And it's not because it's easy. It's not easy. But I think we need a more fundamental view here when we talk about things like user metrics and user adoption and those types of things. So the way I look at it, Harry, is I think overall product metrics fall in about 6 categories. So that's a good place to start. And they are health metrics, usage metrics, adoption metrics, satisfaction metrics, ecosystem metrics, and outcome metrics. Okay, so we don't need to get into each of these 6, and I have some articles that we can throw into the show notes if folks are more interested in these. But first thing you need to recognize is that there isn't like one metric. Like there are many different types of metrics or categories of metrics that you need to be cognizant of. Now, one of these metrics is adoption metrics, right? So, and that's where we get into things like user adoption, user growth, and those sorts of things. One thing to observe about adoption metrics is that adoption doesn't happen on its own, right? Like there need to be certain preconditions that need to be satisfied so you can get to adoption. So when I'm talking to an early stage team, product, or startup, and we are talking about adoption, I often encourage them to have some sort of a North Star on adoption, whatever that is, whether it's number of active users or users that are retained or new user signups. Those are all variants of adoption metrics. So that's fine. But I think it's even more important. Like a lot of teams just stop there. A lot of teams say, okay, this is our adoption metric, and now we're going to make it better. And that's the mistake. The mistake there is, again, adoption is an end result of something else you do. So you're better off measuring those things, those other things. And that's where things like usage metrics come in, or even health metrics come in. So usage metric is about how people are actually using the product, right? And a lot of teams don't actually have a lot of visibility into that. Only if you understand what type of usage leads to adoption will you actually be able to address the inputs. Because in some ways, adoption is the output of your activities.
Absolutely.
So
this is always what frustrates me when they give me like output metrics, and it's like, no, I want input metrics. I want number of tasks created in Notion, number of new projects, number of net new additions to each project in terms of sharing capabilities. What was health metrics, Shreyas?
Yeah, health metrics are, another way to define it is like they're hygiene metrics. And the key, the way I like to describe a metric is like, what key question is this category of metric answering, right? So with health metrics, the key question that it's answering is this product available and performing in the manner that users would reasonably expect, right? So users are not using your product in isolation. They use many different products, and human beings compare how your product does compared to other things that they are used to using. And so, users implicitly tend to have a certain type of expectation for for the type of product you are. And those expectations vary. If I'm using an e-commerce product, my expectations are very different than I'm using a social product versus if I'm using some internal, enterprise product, as just an example. So is this product available and performing in the manner that users would reasonably expect is the key question. And some examples of health metrics are latency, initial load time, data loss rate, errors that you see. So these are things that are really important for you to keep track of, because oftentimes, we fixate on sort of the growth funnel and all of those things. And if we lose sight of like basics that we're not getting right in the product, that are perhaps not very evident, then we might wonder why adoption is not where we want it to be. So that's kind of how I look at health metrics. And health metrics by themselves will rarely drive your business forward, but health metrics, if you don't pay attention to them, can drastically impede your business.
I'm totally with you. A leaky bucket is never a good bucket to have. Can I ask, when you speak and you advise incredible companies, I spoke to many of the founders that you advise, when you speak to founders and work with founders today, what do you think is the most misunderstood metric category, and why do you think that is?
I think one category that is highly misunderstood is, it's not so much a category as it is a type, which is, these days, a lot of people talk about the North Star metric, the NSM. What's your North Star metric? And I'll tell you, I get a lot of emails and messages over all DMs from folks who ask me, hey, I have this product, I have this startup, and I have some ideas on what my North Star metric should be, and here it is. And so, what do you think? And the reason I say this concept is misunderstood is that the North Star metric is not a panacea. And there are some people who want to train you on North Star metrics may make it seem that way. But the North Star metric is not a panacea. Just finding the perfect metric as your NSM is actually not necessary, right? Like when you're especially when you're early stage, what you're mainly looking for is my product resonating, right? And so what I often advise founders is, it's classic, like don't try for perfection with your North Star metric. If you found something that generally works and is measurable, just pick it as your North Star metric. You don't have to try to tweak it and get into immeasurable categories, because oftentimes what happens is the perfect metric is very hard to measure, and so then you try very hard to fix that. And you're spending time working on a metric instead of spending time actually like shipping product and actually improving your usage metrics and your adoption metrics, which are the things that actually matter and will feed into your North Star metric. So it's that aspect is very misunderstood. The other thing I'll say related to North Star metric is, especially for early stage product, I often say that you're going to get a lot more signal from the qualitative inputs than you are simply from your North Star metric. So, and I'm not saying just do one or the other, but again, for early stage products, it's really important not just to stare at a metric. It's very important to get access to qualitative feedback. Throughout my career, one of the best learnings I've had is when I've just exposed a feedback form for users with one field, which is like, tell us what you think about the product, what works, what doesn't work, whatever, like some question to that effect. And then I created a morning routine where there would be an email system where these users' inputs would show up in my email. And so my routine was just to look through those qualitative pieces of feedback. And I got so much more user empathy and insight from those than I could ever get from a dashboard. So yes, North Star metric is useful to have. It's useful to create targets against, etc. But don't try to perfect it. And that part, I think, is very misunderstood, along with not taking into account the importance of qualitative inputs.
Before we get into the different types of product leaders, speaking of that North Star metric and you're advising me in my hypothetical startup journey, should I, the founder and CEO, be the one to determine the North Star metric and prioritize product metrics? Or should that be the responsibility of my CPO, head of product?
Oh boy. The answer to that is, do you feel competent enough to do it? That's the main question. And if you do, as a founder, then by all means define it yourself. And of course, nobody really does it on their own. Like you're in a real work setting, you're getting feedback from folks anyway. But yeah, it would be your responsibility if you are fairly competent in this area. If you're not very competent in the area, it is still ultimately your responsibility. Now, you might delegate aspects of it to somebody else on your team, whether it's the chief product officer or somebody else. But ultimately, because this is such a top level metric that you're going to create targets against, that you're going to hopefully track on a regular basis, you have to be deeply involved. And so, in either case, whether you're competent with it or you don't feel highly competent with it, your involvement as a founder is extremely necessary, especially for an early stage product.
Do you feel competent? I'm glad this is a hypothetical discussion, Shreyas. I do want to discuss, because the show's actually in the verticalized way here, like 20 products started because I felt that founders didn't know what truly great looked like when hiring great product people and great product leaders in particular. And when we spoke before, you said that there are 3 product leaders in terms of different types. I'd love to just understand. I'm, again, the founder and CEO. I'm hiring my first CPO, head of product leader, whatever we want to call them. What are the 3 different product leader personas that I should know about when entering this hiring process?
Yeah. So I, at this point, just in the last year, I've spoken with more than 50 founders about the general area of my product is growing really fast, and I think I need a CPO or a VP product, or my board tells me, or my VCs tell me that I should go hire a VP product and delegate various aspects of the product to that person. And so, they reach out to me, and sometimes we'll get on a call to discuss it. And every single conversation is actually very different. And because fundamentally, if product is what's going to drive your startup success, you have to create your own script around what you are looking for. And that can only be done if we understand how your business is going to be driven forward and whatnot. From those conversations, I have been able to extract some patterns. And so, one of the patterns is the 3 types of product leaders, and they are the operator, the craftsperson, and the visionary. And when I kind of start sharing, these names or these labels, founders will start asking me like, "Oh, so like, which one is right for me? Just tell me which one is right for me." And I was like, "No, not so fast." What is really important is like there is no one right answer, first of all, right? Like it really depends. But the second thing is that it's important to recognize that it's not like a certain person can only be an operator. Like actually, highly competent senior product leaders, they can wear each of these hats. So you can think about them as hats instead of categories. But still, people have a primary hat. And that's the hat that makes them most comfortable. That's the hat they would rather wear than any other hat. So I'll just briefly go into what each of these is. But the operator is excellent at scaling teams, driving cross-org alignment, and unblocking execution. And the operator's superpower is communication. On the other hand, one of their challenges is actually original product insight. So this is very important to remember. Like oftentimes there are operators who just like have amazing resumes and they've scaled companies and products extremely well, whether it's larger companies or mid-sized companies. But despite all that experience, I have found that they do not have the ability to come up with really original product insights. And this is where often things go wrong with CPO hiring or VP product hiring, where sometimes your situation is such that you do not yet need an operator. Eventually, almost everybody starts needing an operator in their head of product role, but you don't yet need one. But you bring somebody on with the expectation that business is going to quadruple at some point. And so at some point, we're going to need somebody like this. So why not bring them early? But the problem is now this operator starts operating, right? Instead of helping you get to a better position with your product market fit. Because to get to a better position with your PMF, that requires original product insight. And without much help, the operator is not going to be able to do it on their own. And so that's just an example of where things go wrong. Go ahead.
When does that transition happen from not needing the operator to needing the operator? Is it post product market fit? Is it Series C and beyond? Is it post international expansion? When is that transition of now you need an operator?
Yeah, so I personally went through that transition myself when I was leading Connect, which is Stripe Connect, which is a major business for Stripe. I started leading it when the product was already being used by quite a few of Stripe customers. The team was only 4 engineers at the time, and so it was early-ish in its life. And the business I was leading it for 3 years, and the business and the product was just scaled tremendously in that time. And then at some point, I realized that, this is getting too big for me. And not big in terms of just, my ability to manage the business or my ability to manage the team, but more in terms of just what I'm passionate about. Because, as during those 3 years, the product grew, I don't know how many X, but significantly. And the team grew correspondingly as well. And I just realized that I was doing things, my day was spent in doing things that frankly, I did not enjoy. And in many cases, I found boring. But that was the job at that point. And so back then, I went to my manager, John Collison was my manager back then. And I said, I think within the next several months, I think I need to go back to something that's earlier stage. And so we ended up actually doing that. I went back to something that was very early stage at Stripe and helped grow that business, which was Stripe Terminal, its in-person payment solution. So from that experience, what I learned, and having then seen many founders and product leaders go through similar experiences, is that it's definitely post-product market fit. It is nearly impossible for an operator to solely or mainly bring your product to product market fit. Now, it can happen, but it's extremely rare and you should not bank on it. But once you hit product market fit, and as your product starts scaling, and as the demand for it starts growing, and as the cross-organization complexity increases, now what happens is, in addition to managing the product, you also have a real big organization to manage, right? And oftentimes it's cross-team, right? You're not owning everything. And that's where operators are tremendously valuable. Because they are extremely skilled at orchestrating cross-organizational action. They're extremely skilled at communication to make sure that everybody is aligned. They're fairly skilled at setting targets, setting goals, and creating a sort of a rhythm in terms of how you launch things in this complex internal environment. And so really that is the point. Now, it's not necessarily corresponding to this, the Series C or Series D or Series A or B, right? Because as you know, there are many kind of late stage companies that are still pre-PMF for whatever reason. And so it really depends on sort of like what you're trying to do, where your product is at, what challenges you're facing. But at some point, it becomes very clear that you need an operator, and then you need to go find one.
Can you help me out? What's the craftsperson in terms of like that profile then? Walk me through that one.
Yes. So the craftsperson is excellent at defining products and strategy and mentoring other product people. And their superpower is product insight.
Huh.
So if the craftsperson is able to translate an extremely ambiguous goal or an extremely ambiguous vision into concrete product that has a very high chance of winning. And that skill of translating something high level and ambiguous to actual product, actual user experience, the pixels, the customer support experience, the interplay of the various things that need to happen to make a product and a business successful, they are able to translate that really well. And so, again, their superpower is product insight, but they're not excellent at dealing with large orgs and its taxes, right? Because any large org comes with all sorts of taxes that you have to deal with. They just don't enjoy that, right? Over my career, I started off as a visionary, which we can talk about later, but then I morphed myself into being a craftsperson. And so, like, as organizations started getting large, I was just like uncomfortable with managing that. Like I said, I found that boring. They love spending time with the team and users. Okay, so now it's interesting. Operators, they love spending time with their peers, so other functional heads and company execs and the board. Whereas craftspeople absolutely love spending time with users and customers and the team, and they get really excited about product deep dives and let's walk through this flow and how can we make it better, and that sort of conversation, which is very different from a conversation you might have with your cross-functional executive team or with the board, for instance. And so that's the craftsperson, and is a very essential ingredient in any team. Whether it's a product leader or even individual product managers, you need these people so that you can translate something ambiguous into something concrete.
If I'm hiring my first CPO, head of product, whatever we want to name it, but senior product hire, is that profile the profile I want to go for, being the craftsperson?
That is a reasonable default, especially if you're early stage startup. And say perhaps pre-PMF or just about reaching PMF, then craftsperson is a fairly good default. But there again, it depends on your competence as a founder. And so particularly, again, when I go through these kind of sessions with founders, one of the core things I ask them is like, why do you want to hire a product manager? Whether it's at any level, an individual contributor or a leader, what is it that you want this person to do that you are doing right now? Because presumably you want to kind of like delegate certain responsibilities. So what is it? And is it the right thing to delegate? Sometimes, Harry, the answer is, I want to delegate a lot of the operational work. I want to delegate, the figuring out like how the sprints are going to work, or figuring out, how customer support is going to get impacted by this new product feature that we are launching. Those types of things I want to delegate, but I still feel like I need to own the core kind of customer insight, the core product insights, and some of the definition of the product. In those cases, you may want to bring a sort of like a mid-level or a junior operator type person, and kind of delegate those operations while still holding on to the visionary and craftsperson hat yourself as a founder. So that is possible, but the default craftsperson is a good place to start.
Before we move into the visionary, you mentioned like the craftsperson struggles with the scaling product team. What are the first things to break, Shreyas, in a scaling product team? What are the first signs of things breaking?
Yeah, so there are two core things that tend to break across most situations. One is within the team, and that is that as the team grows, a large part of your role as a leader becomes one, you're basically a repeater. You just have to keep repeating the same thing. And you may repeat it in different ways, but you're effectively repeating the same message. And so you can imagine, like, if you're managing a team of 20 or 25 people, you can like have a sort of personal relationship, some amount of trust, some amount of like just mind meld with a group that's say 20 or 25. But now your team is 50 people. I'm including engineers, designers, etc. Or like the team is 80 people, right? Like there's a team that's kind of building a product that has 80 people. It's impossible. It's impossible to create that mind meld, right? So you need to change your approach, which is now instead of relying on one-to-one or one-to-few interactions, you have to rely on one-to-many interactions, right? But people don't remember as much as we think they remember, right? So you have to keep repeating the vision, the goals, the strategy, etc., etc., and like that becomes a really important part of your role. And a craftsperson can do this, but as the team scales, most craftspeople don't enjoy that aspect that much, because a craftsperson derives energy from being in the product, from having intimate conversations about evolving the product. And so it's not the kind of thing that a craftsperson wants to do as a major part of their job. And so that's one thing that kind of starts breaking internally for a craftsperson that makes it harder. Externally, so outside of the org, outside of the team, what ends up happening is as the business scales, there are other parts of the business, other departments like sales and support and BD and marketing and various other parts of the organization that begin relying on you. And you begin relying more on them as well. You're no longer kind of self-sufficient and scrappy. And so as the company has grown and as your product has grown, there are a lot of just like alignment issues. There are a lot of dependencies that you need to resolve. And at that point, when you reach a certain scale, that becomes an extremely large part of a product leader's role. And at that point, you are basically just in many, many meetings, unfortunately. And again, craftspeople can do meetings and they enjoy meetings. But if a craftsperson spends 3 weeks, going to these various alignment meetings, they are going to get frustrated, right? So that's the part that starts breaking outside of the team. At which point, if you're a self-aware craftsperson that wants to remain a craftsperson, you start thinking, oh, maybe it's time for me to go back to something more scrappy, something more early stage.
I totally get you. I'm just intrigued because I'm wondering what visionary is. If Craftsperson does have the original product insight, does have that creativity within them, what is the profile of a visionary?
Yeah, so a visionary is a very interesting one. And like among these profiles, the visionary is the most rare, or at least the competent visionary is extremely rare. The visionary is excellent at big picture thinking and inventing what's next. And their superpower being that they can see what others cannot see. And it would seem like this is, this should be a fairly common trait. But again, a competent visionary is extremely rare. And so
what's the difference between a competent and an incompetent visionary, given so much of their beliefs are future held? What's the difference?
Yeah, so it is, you cannot define it looking forward, simply because ultimately, and this is not going to be a satisfying answer, but this is true as far as I've seen, is you're just more right about where the world is headed. And there are people, clearly there are people who are more right than others. This is actually why I love one of Amazon's leadership principles is leaders are right a lot. And it's my favorite of they have really great leadership principles. This one's my favorite because this is so misunderstood because, there are many people who say, well, like, there is no such thing as being visionary, as being right a lot. Like, you just, you follow a process, and make sure it's a good process. Make sure you set OKRs. Make sure you execute well, and success will be yours. No, that is not how anything works in the real world. Right? That is actually the operator speaking when that operator has taken a product from, say, 20 to 60 or 60 to 100. And it's easy to say that, oh, success is all about just following processes, setting structures, setting goals, and diligently following them. And all of that is very important. But they forget that it's actually a high degree of creativity and instinct that gave you the luxury to be able to take a product from 20 to 60, right? And that could have only happened with the vision of a visionary and the craft of a craftsperson who are right a lot, right? So now sometimes it gets confusing, like, okay, so but what's the difference between a visionary and a craftsperson? One of the challenges with a visionary is that a visionary finds it difficult to translate that big vision, which, by the way, again, by definition, very few people can see that vision. Even many craftspeople cannot see that big vision. A visionary finds it hard to translate that to concrete product steps. Like, okay, so I want to do this. I want to revolutionize, I don't know, spreadsheets, right? Like, and I have a certain vision in my head of how that is supposed to happen. But what is the first step I take? What is the next step I take? And what's the step after that? That is where a visionary works very well with a craftsperson, because a craftsperson can kind of translate that into concrete steps along the way. And again, there are many visionaries who are also craftspeople, right? So, and I've worked with many such folks. And so they can do that job, but only to a point. Like these really great visionaries, they often find it hard, not always, but they often find it hard without the support of craftspeople and operators to do it consistently.
Can I ask, should the founder not be the visionary and the CPO not be the craftsperson?
That is often the case. Again, it's by definition that, like, you need to have a big vision for something that does not exist or is highly suboptimal in the world that you want to fix. And so oftentimes founders end up being that kind of visionary archetype. And on founding teams, I've found that it's usually, one of the founders that's the visionary. And perhaps, there's another founder that's more like an operator, and maybe even a third that's more like a craftsperson. And I'm not saying it has to be that kind of composition. But typically, like at this point, I've kind of advised, 100 plus companies just in the past 2 years on various topics. And I found that, like, usually there's one founder who's the core visionary who then takes ownership of the product early on, naturally. And kind of like, sometimes wears the craftsperson hat. And like I said, they can be fairly good at it to kind of translate that vision into certain kind of product manifestations. But at some point, it becomes harder for them. Like, because once you start getting users and once you start getting usage, what ends up happening is users are pulling you in many different directions, right? The visionary has a very clear view of the future, but being responsible people, they also now take into account user and customer feedback, and that can get confusing at times. Even if it's not confusing for them, they may find it hard to kind of like, bring the team along on, like, okay, given all this kind of conflicting feedback and this plethora of, ways in which we can take the product, here's what we're going to do as step 1, step 2, step 3. Here's how we're going to actually build out the product. These are the flows that matter. These are the flows that don't matter. That's when, whether it's a CPO or a VP product, or even a director of product or an individual product manager, a craftsperson becomes a great asset for a visionary.
How do you determine when to listen to customer feedback versus when to progress with expected and planned roadmap and ignore it? Tough question, I know.
Oh boy, that's the perennial question of product management. And look, my view on this is there are some teams that say that they are highly customer driven, And that's seen kind of as a virtue, which is like, oh, we are very customer driven. But in reality, what ends up happening when you kind of label yourself that way, that you're customer driven, is you end up just following what customers are telling you. And sometimes that can be the right answer, especially, once your product has already sort of like reached a certain scale, you can be customer driven and build, what they ask you to build. And because you already have some assets, some differentiation. And so that works. But I have found that it's very important to, ground what you do in terms of a core strategy. So the strategy becomes the piece, the artifact, the guideline for when you listen to customers and when you don't listen to customers. And this is best explained perhaps via an example. One of the products I managed at Stripe was Stripe Terminal, which is an in-person kind of point-of-sale payment solution. And point-of-sale payments have been around for a really long time, and Stripe was creating its own solution like that. And one of the challenges that we faced is that we are competing against very powerful incumbents. And again, because point-of-sale payments had been around for a long time, there was a massive gap that we had to fill in terms of just basic table stakes features. Like, for instance, to give you a concrete example, when you are accepting payments, say with a card, like physical card, you're accepting payments, for events. It is complicated because sometimes the event might be occurring, say it's a concert or something else. Mm-hmm. The event might be occurring in a place where there's no network access. Okay, so how do you do that online authorization that this card is good for the $100 ticket that it's purchasing, or whatever goods that they're purchasing at the concert? You can't. And so there is a solution to that, which is offline mode for payment terminals. And so and it's not easy to build that. So as we were trying to get Stripe Terminal to get adoption, we would get all these feature requests, right? Which is like, oh, we need offline mode, and we need all sorts of other kind of security features, or all sorts of additional customization features. Like, for instance, the point of sale terminal that you see, the payment terminal that you see at the grocery store is highly customized. It has the branding, various other things. And so customers were asking us for all of these features, and our team was very tiny. If we were to just build all of these, what I call table stakes features, it would just take us 5 years just to even just basically meet the table stakes. And we could have done that. But at the end of those 5 years, you end up with a product that's just a poor substitute for one of the incumbent products that have had a 10-year, 15-year lead on you, right? So yes, I can follow what customers are saying, and I can launch these features that will make them happy, but now I have a product that's hardly differentiated, right? So in this situation, what we decided to do was something different. We said, you know what? We are actually going to, I have this framework called, and I haven't talked much about it at all about it, like sort of externally. So this will be the first time. I have this framework called the BTD framework, which is essentially for any sort of like important aspect of your product. You decide whether you want to come in below table stakes, that is B. You decide if you want to come in at table stakes, that is T. Or you decide you actually want to differentiate, that is above table stakes, above what is expected, and that's differentiation. So just use BTD, right? Which is be intentful about certain customer requests and say, you know what, for this type of request, we are going to come in below table stakes, right? So that's your B. In other cases, you may decide, oh, I want to meet table stakes. And in some other cases, you may go well beyond what customers are saying or build something entirely different that customers aren't even asking for, which is a lot of what we ended up doing with Terminal. And so that it becomes the basis of your strategy. And that's why I think being strategy driven is very important.
Can I ask you a hard question? When angel investing and advising companies today, when you look at that framework, which are you most attracted to and do you find most compelling as a product leader, product investor? Which one are you most attracted to today? A hard question.
In terms of, categories, what I get most attracted to, or categories of like companies or founders, is where
like below table or above. When you look at those, like I like ones which actually come in above. Like I hate it when we have to catch up to incumbent feature sets and then we assume that they're just going to stagnate, and they're never going to stagnate. You're just always going to be behind, actually. I'd rather say, hey, you know what? The current POSs may have all these features, but fuck it. We're going to make this feature that plays Iron Maiden when you buy anything. And it's going to be a wow consumer experience. So we're going to come in like above, but kind of accept below in other areas. Do you see what I mean? Do you have a preference when you're investing for where they insert themselves on that feature insertion point or product insertion?
What I found most interesting is, and I think this generally works for most products and new products and new startups, is when you are entering a fairly crowded space where maybe there's a very powerful incumbent, the customer segment you target becomes really important, because what you want to do is you want to target a kind of customer, a segment of customer that the incumbent is not doing a very good job of satisfying. And for that target customer, then you determine, okay, what are their unfulfilled needs, right? So yes, the incumbent has a bunch of like features and like they're doing well, etc. But you will find pockets of customers and segments, these segments that are highly dissatisfied. And so that's a good strategy for a new product, where you find those pockets of customer segments that are highly dissatisfied with certain features, because they're not important for the incumbent across its customer base, but they're very important for this specific segment. And that's where I like companies that are very clear on targeting certain segments and then creating highly differentiated experiences for them. And when you do that, and this is essentially what we did with Stripe Terminal, is when you target a specific segment and meet their unfulfilled needs in surprising ways, and you go way above table stakes, you differentiate, they will give you a lot of leeway. They will be willing to live without a bunch of other conventional table stakes. Because your product performs so well on their core use case, where the alternatives are not that great, frankly, for them, that they will be willing to live with some pain. They'll give you a lot of, just leeway to catch up on some of the table stakes.
I totally get you there, especially in kind of the verticalization. Can I ask you, when you think about your angel investing today, how do you think that has changed your product mindset, having had the exposure that you now have from advising and investing in so many?
Yeah, I think the core thing that perhaps, and this one's very obvious in hindsight, but previously, when I started angel investing, I was very attracted to the idea. And again, being sort of like a product idea person, a craftsperson, I was like, this needs to exist in the world. And so I'm very excited about this. I want to invest in this. I want to support this founder and whatnot. And what I realized over time is that is a necessary, but by no means a sufficient condition. In fact, it's not even one of the main conditions. And instead, I realized that the core thing that matters is just, how great is this founder? And this is why it's obvious, right? It's not like I'm the first person to realize this, but I had to sort of go through that journey to really accept that realization that, if the founder, and now the core question I ask is this person among the most capable people I've ever encountered? Right. And it's a very simple litmus test, and obviously, that requires conversation, that requires asking, good questions and whatnot. But if that is true, and that's the bar I apply for advising as well, right? Like, because I want to keep the number of companies to a manageable size. And so one of the core things I look at is this person one of the most capable persons I've ever come across? And are they, do I think that they will be able to create and hire a top-notch team?
Can I ask, if you look back at the Collisons in particular, can I ask, what profile would you put them in terms of craftsperson, visionary, or operator? They're different, very different people. So I'm sure they'd be different.
Yeah. So, they're both brilliant people. So it is a tough question. It's hard to kind of put them in one box, and not that these archetypes are about boxes. But my assessment would be that Patrick is very much a visionary craftsperson type person. So, every time I've interacted with him, and I learned a lot from, about product from interacting with him. That's been the conversation, is the visionary craftsperson mindset, which is, what is the big idea here, right? Like, and how are we going to differentiate? And how are we going to get user adoption? And also, how do we get like the product details right? How do we surprise users? How do we make, how do we further the brand? How is this brand aligned? Those types of things were a constant kind of, aspect of my interactions with Patrick. So he would be that visionary craftsperson archetype. John is interesting in that, like, he's one of the rare people who can do, I think, who kind of can do, and I've seen him do all three really well. In fact, there were many times when, like, John was managing certain teams on an interim basis at Stripe that, like, he clearly had never managed that type of team, whether it's sales or something else before. But he was able to do it really well. So I think John is harder for me because I've seen him kind of do each of these three, and not just do each of these three, but like actually just enjoy doing it, at least from the way I was looking at it.
I totally agree with you on John being a unique mixture of all three. I totally agree with you there. Final one, and it's a bit random. How important is time to value in a customer experience? Often I speak to founders like, we need to reduce the time to value. It needs to be quicker. It needs to be more kind of emotive and valuable faster. And sometimes I think yes, and sometimes I think you have to go slow to go fast, and you do need to connect your data sources, your different accounts, whatever the process is. How do you think about time to value when advising companies today?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what is the core customer motivation and how strong is that core customer motivation. Okay, so, and I think this is something that very few teams do on a consistent basis. And in fact, some of the companies I advise, like I love to see after I've advised them for a while, where they'll run some products by me, and they will actually start with, okay, so the core customer motivation or the core user motivation we think is X. And so in order to help the customer fulfill that motivation, here's the product. So they lead with the motivation rather than leading with the actual product experience. And so I love that. Now, just expanding on that a bit, when the core customer motivation is extremely high, you can afford to lengthen that time to value, right? But when the core customer motivation is not that high, and particularly, you have to remember, it's not just about what they hope to accomplish, it's also about what alternatives they have. Mm-hmm. So the alternatives factor into the degree of motivation around fulfilling that motivation with your product. So if I have a lot of alternatives, including the alternative of continuing with the tool or the app that I already use, that I'm used to using, which may be suboptimal, then my core motivation as a customer is not going to be that high. And so then in that case, you've got to show me the value sooner, right? So let's take B2B, because I just love this question, and there is so much so much value to be created by companies and startups if they understand this consistently. Is you take some B2B products, and my observation is some B2B products are what I call mandate products. And what I mean by mandate products is that when an executive gets hired in a specific role, that executive makes it a company mandate, and certainly a mandate for himself or herself, to roll out that product across the organization or across their department. So that's a mandate product. Okay, what's an example of a mandate product? Workday is a great example of a mandate product, which is in many parts of the world, and certainly in the US. If you are a chief people officer that has joined, or VP of human resources that just joined a scaling company, say more than 500 or 1,000 people, often a lot of the work is happening in spreadsheets or some tools. And you come in, and the first thing you say is, we're going to roll out Workday, right? And so Workday becomes a mandate product. If you are a CFO, if you're hired as the first CFO, you'll come in and you will likely roll out NetSuite as the mandate product. And there are many other examples like that if you're the chief data officer or whatever. But the point here is that a mandate product usually has a very long time to value, because you have to kind of roll it out across the organization. You have to train people. You have to, it's like a 6-month process, sometimes even a year-long process, for instance, to roll out NetSuite within an organization. So that time to value is very long. But the observation here is that the credibility has already been established, which is like, you cannot go wrong if you roll out this product within the organization, right? You will not be fired. In fact, you might get promoted for rolling this out, because you'll create a whole lot of cost savings, or you'll create a whole lot of efficiencies. And that's what you want to do as a new executive, right? Within the company, is to start showing how you are being a lot more effective than the company was before you. So in those situations, like, the marketing and the branding also matters. The positioning matters, right? So when your positioning is very unique and very strong, you can have a much longer time to value as well. So again, it's like, I don't think there's one right answer. And sometimes on Twitter or other places, people will just say, this is the one way to do it. And it's like, no. You have to be really thoughtful and intentional about these things.
Shreyas, the trouble I have with you is I could talk to you all day about a lot of these things, because I have a lot of product questions where I've thought them for a long time and needed your wisdom. But we can do a part 2 in another segment. I want to do a quick fire round now, where I say a short statement and then you give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so what in the realm of product have you changed your mind on recently? Again, we can take
the role of metrics.
How so? What about the role of metrics?
And it's basically what I shared earlier, which is like, there isn't one type of metric. There are actually, several types of metrics, and you have to really decide what type of metrics are really important for you right now versus what will become important later.
What are the biggest mistakes you see founders make when hiring their first product hires?
They overemphasize background, resume, titles, and companies that the executive has worked at, and they often ignore their instinct about the executive during the interview process, and then unfortunately end up regretting the choice 6 months, 12 months down the road.
What one piece of advice would you give to a new product leader starting a new role today?
First, focus on understanding the customer and the domain extremely well. Don't pressure yourself into creating value within the first 30 days or even the first 60 days because you're playing the long game. And also build start building relationships and strong relationships across the organization, but especially with your team from day one. Do not postpone that.
As a product leader yourself, a bit of self-reflection, what was your biggest strength and what was your biggest weakness?
Biggest strength was product sense, the ability to often be right about what product is going to work. Biggest weakness was about making the broad organization aware about all the progress that my team and my product was making.
Final one, what recent company product strategy have you been most impressed by?
There's a company that's based out of India. It's called Lead School, and I've been advising them for more than a year. And their product strategy is just really exciting for me because what they're doing is they are bringing really high quality school K through 12 education to smaller towns and smaller cities. So not the big metropolitan areas in India, but the smaller towns and smaller cities in India, where what they want to do is they want to create greater parity of the quality of education you can get being living in a smaller town as a child in India, and they're doing that via a combination of curriculum, technology, and operations to support the curriculum and technology. And so it's been great to sort of like watch them kind of not just formulate that strategy, but also execute on it over the last year.
Shreyas, I knew this would be a great show, but this is like shows like this make me really appreciate why I love what I do so much. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for putting up with my basic questions, and I've so enjoyed having you on.
Yeah, likewise, Harry. This was a blast, and looking forward to our next chat.